Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite A-lister food writers. It's about life, culture and politics all through the prism of food. And this week, as it's Lent, we're off to fast in Cyprus with Georgina Hayden.
The way we do Lent over here, which is, I might give up chocolate or I might give up cheese. No, these meat-eating carnivores who love a grill have given up all animal products for almost 50 days. That's a really, really big deal. They've gone hardcore.
Her book, Nistisima, borrows the vegan dishes from the Greek Orthodox Church, which frames her family life and looks deeply at fasting as a rich vein of inspiration for meat and dairy-free recipes. But it's about much more than food. It's about how family, festival and ritual creates a rich food culture which connects us with where food comes from and why, as Socrates says, we eat to live. We began by discussing just how hard it is to find a gap in those bookshelves these days and what it takes to get a book deal.
You're so right. It is really hard to write a cookbook now. You know, it's quite. There are a lot of amazing food writers out there, and it's such an honour to actually get a book deal. I think there was a time when actually they felt like it was very saturated, whereas now it's quite hard, isn't it? I think the key thing is if you've got, there's lots of things at play in terms of getting a book deal, aren't there? You've got to have a really original idea. If you've got an idea that no one's seen before, it doesn't matter about your profile, it doesn't matter about things like social media so much, you're going to get a book deal. But then if you've got an idea that has maybe been seen before, because that's okay, right? Like you don't only have one veg book, you don't only have one roasting tin book, there are many. So if you've got an idea that's been seen before, I think the thing that helps you there is your profile. Things like social media, things like television, radio, XYZ. So there's lots of things at play, but it definitely feels like it's harder than ever to get a book deal. So I do feel really honoured to have written this book, but at the same time, I don't think it's really been done before. Not anything recently at all, in that sense. So it's, I'm really chuffed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I did a series recently for the André Simon shortlist. And at the beginning of each of the episodes, Yasimi Arabsala, the food assessor, kind of gave us this masterclass in what it takes to be an award-winning food book. And it is originality and it is voice. And actually, I think that has to come from something very personal. And that's what you do, isn't it? I mean, this book is all about your childhood. Yeah. Again, it's about your family. It's full of your yayas, both of them. But it's also about a real piece of that childhood. It's about fasting. That feels quite original to me. How did you kind of land on that particular idea of it? Tell us the Eureka light bulb moment.
Do you know what? There really was a Eureka light bulb moment. It was when I was writing the book before. So I'd written Taverna, and Taverna is all about my heritage, so really personal, Greek Cypriot, all about my family. And I'd written that, and it's a well-rounded book. There's everything in there, meat, veg, fish, everything. And I was writing it, and I was doing all the publicity. And every time I was talking to people about it, you'd get the question, is there any vegetarian food in there? Are there vegan dishes, X, Y, Z? And I found myself repeating myself a lot, saying, actually, the thing is about Greek and Cypriot food is we eat predominantly vegan and veg. However, everyone associates it with things like souvla and grills, whatnot, because that's what we're famous for. But the reality is, because of our orthodoxy and our faith, we actually don't eat meat most of the year. If you're doing it really strictly, like a yaya or, like older generations, you can do around 200 days a year where you're not eating any dairy or animal products. So as a result, our diet is very vegan-centric. And I found myself talking about it so much, I thought, hold on. If I'm boring people about this, I need to put my money where my mouth is and I need to write about it and look into it. So it started from there, and I spoke to my editor and I said, look, I think there's something in this, it's fascinating. It's not a book. I don't envision this being a book that is preachy at all. I want it to be factual and historical, and I want to look into why we eat so many vegan dishes. But at the same time, I want it to be a celebration of the fact that you can eat a plant-based diet without any effort or trying to convert existing recipes into vegan recipes. If you look beyond your own repertoire of dishes, you look to other cultures, you'll find that there's so many dishes and recipes that just happen to be vegan. And I think that's what interested me. Things that just happen to be vegan, not things that are made vegan, things that just already are. So when I started looking at the Greek church, I looked at our dishes and then it stemmed from there. And I thought, hold on, I need to go a bit further. So the Orthodox Church, I was like, let's look at the surrounding countries that are affected as well. So, topically, Russia, Ukraine. I spoke to Alyssa Timoshkina and Olia Hercules. I went to, spoke to people in Serbia, Syria, Lebanon, and down to Egypt. And all these countries are sort of, they're all neighbours at the end of the day. So the dishes there's lots of familiarity between the dishes. You get a variation of dolma, gobebia, dolmades, stuffed vine leaves. They travel throughout the countries in one form or another.
I mean, that's what I love about it. It is deep. I love the feeling of travelling when I'm reading about food. But I don't just want to kind of skim the surface and do a city break version of it. I want to go deep and I want to find out about the religion. I really do. I'm fascinated, as we all are. And, it's all around us, isn't it? I remember talking to Saliha Mahmoud Ahmed when she was talking about foodology on the show. And she was talking about fasting as part of her upbringing. And every weekend, they didn't just they were taught to fast by just having brunch a little bit later on a Saturday. And it was just about not eating sort of, just because you do, but actually as part of a ritual. And it trains you to really understand and love food and appreciate food. And I also talked to the Natural Flavour guys, and they went back to Jamaica when they got their first, published book deal. They self-published their first one. And they bumped into this rich Rasta tradition that was all part of their family, all of which is vegan. So, they are really... these ideas are not sort of being brought out just to tick a box of a trend. This is digging deep into all of our heritage here. This is a very eclectic food culture we live in now. Let's find out more about it. It's fantastically interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, Georgie Socrates. Is that your maiden name?
So my maiden name, yeah. Socrates is the first, when it's a first name. So Socrates is when it's your first name and Socratus is when it's your surname. So for me, I was Georgia Socrates, so it's my surname. That was a belter. Don't know why I got rid of that. I know my husband can hear.
So you are Georgie Socrates. How on earth did you change?
I know,
Crazy.
madness.
It reminded me of Epicurus. Carolyn Still writes about this in Satopia. She says, Epicurus is one of the most misunderstood philosophers of the last 2,000 years, because we think of Epicurean as gluttony and feasting, but actually what Epicurus was all about, he was like the king of fasting, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
He was, everything in moderation and really love it. So if you're going for a long walk, a glass of water on a really hot day is absolutely delicious.
Exactly.
And that's what fasting teaches you, isn't it?
Exactly. So the first quote in the book is Socrates. So it's eat to live, not live to eat. And when I first heard that quote, however many years ago, I remember being horrified because I was like, wow, my namesake, how can we be so different? I definitely live to eat. I just didn't understand it at all. Whereas as I sort of researched fasting more and understood more, I genuinely think what Socrates is saying is about an appreciation and about fueling ourselves and nourishing ourselves. I don't think what he's saying is, oh, I'm someone who doesn't want to eat, I just need it, the calories to get by in a day. I think it's more a case of listen to what your body is saying and fuel it. And I think that's the thing that fasting has taught me. It's about, so nowadays we have things like Veganuary or Meat-Free Monday. These are not new ideas. It doesn't matter how clever we think we are. We are not. This has been going on for centuries. And I think this is precisely what he means. It's the idea of course, indulgence is fantastic and we all have to have moments of it. But at the same time, to really appreciate those moments, you have to have a sense of balance. There has to be the times where you're not indulging and when you are listening to your body. And for me, as someone writing a vegan book as a non-vegan, I think has actually been a really fascinating process. There are a lot of vegan books out now, and that's a brilliant thing. But I would say the majority are written by people who live that way. And actually, for me, it's a sense of balance. It's a sense of listening to myself and understanding my body. And I think that's exactly what those very, very clever gentlemen were referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. And in order to save the planet, we need to eat 30% less meat anyway.
Totally.
The National Food Strategy is certainly suggesting that it's a great way to find some balance in our lives.
For sure.
And appreciate things and come alive a little bit more. The book's coming out at this time of year, which is Lent, it's in time for Easter. As you say, you've talked to Alyssa and Olia about Ukraine and Russia, and you've talked to all sorts of people from all over the world who celebrate Easter. Easter is a really important part of the calendar to so many people. Tell us what it was like when you were growing up. You grew up in North London, but you were going back to Cyprus all the time. But what was your Easter like?
Oh my gosh, like Easter for me is way bigger than Christmas. It trumps Christmas in every way. I love it. It's such a big deal. And, people celebrate different holidays for different reasons. Not everyone who celebrates Christmas, a lot of people probably don't go to church, and that's totally fine. You celebrate it for whatever reason you want. I'm never going to judge. But for people that are religious, especially the Orthodox faith, Easter is a huge deal. It's a 4-day celebration. When I've been in Cyprus for Easter, you're getting up at 5 o'clock, going to church, drinking ouzo at 7 a.m.
As a child?
Yes, as a child. It's a really big deal. So on Easter Sunday, so you've essentially fasted for 40 to 50 days, depending on how the calendar falls. You haven't eaten any animal products. Forget the way we do Lent over here, which is, I might give up chocolate, or I might give up cheese. No, these meat-eating carnivores who love a grill have given up all animal products for almost 50 days. That's a really, really big deal. They've gone hardcore. Then the week before Easter is spent... So, you've got Easter on the Sunday. So that week is spent making really traditional breads. There's even a type of cheese that is created just for Easter Sunday called flauna cheese. And this cheese is made just to make one type of bread. Like, it's that big deal. So you spend 2-3 days making the flaunas. You get up at 5 a.m. and go to church. You have your ouzo, you have your zivania. And then on Easter Sunday, so my favourite Easter of all time was spent in the mountains in Cyprus where my paternal granddad's from. And you get up at 7, you go to church, and then in the village they've got whole lambs on spits that get put on in the morning. They're basted in red wine, oregano. It's really basic stuff. We're not talking like high-end stuff here. It's really simple food. The wood ovens, the communal wood ovens are lit. The village school has got games in the courtyard, and the whole street is just lined with plastic tables and chairs, and the village just feasts and parties all day. And it's like the best big fat Greek wedding you've ever been to in your life. It's amazing. You can keep your turkey and your cranberry sauce for all I'm concerned. A slow cooked lamb on a spit after 40 odd days of not eating anything is just like the way to go. It's brilliant. So fun.
God, I'm salivating. Your first food moment takes us just to before that amazing feast. It's when the fasting is still happening. So your first food moment is lagana. It's the Clean Monday. It's a bread you make on Clean Monday. Tell us about that one.
Yes. So over, in UK at least, you have Pancake Day, and then you have Ash Wednesday, don't you? And that's when Lent starts. So for us, you have to really gear up, because it is such a big deal. You have to gear up for this period of fasting. So we start fasting on a Monday, and that Monday is called Gathara Deftera, which literally translates as Gathara means clean, and Deftera is Monday, Clean Monday. The week before Gathara Deftera, you have Cheese Week, Cheese Fair Week, which is the week when you have to eat all the dairy in your fridge. And before that, a few days beforehand, you have something called Smoky Thursday, which is when you have to finish all the meat in your fridge and freezer. So the build up as well to get to Gathara Deftera is a big deal. You've got Smoky Thursday, you've got, Cheese Week, you have to eat all your dairy, and then bam, you've prepared for a week and a half, eaten all your animal products, and it's Clean Monday. Clean Monday is a bank holiday in Cyprus and Greece. All the schools and everything's shut. And people traditionally would have almost like picnics. They would fly kites to be closer to the divine. And there is one bread that is only really should be made on this day, and it's called lagana. And it's a bit like like an Italian focaccia. It's a thin bread. Traditionally, it wasn't leaven. It didn't have any yeast in it. That was, it was made in biblical times, and in the situations it was made, there wasn't any yeast. But now we put yeast in it. It's just that bit more delicious. And it's olive oil, and it's got sesame on top. And it's very simple, but in the way that focaccia is one of those breads that you just, you start and you can't stop. I sort of feel like, I know you should only eat it on Gathara Deftera. I kind of like making it all year round because it's so tasty. And actually, that's the one, it's a really significant dish. And it was really conscious to start the book with that recipe. That was a really conscious decision. You know, we fast all year round, every Wednesday, every Friday. There's lots of periods of fasting. It isn't just Easter. However, the Easter fast is the big one. It's called Great Lent. So that was a conscious decision to put it first. And I think it's a great recipe.
It is a great recipe. And it's a real celebration of sensible grandmother behaviour. You know, clean out the back of the fridge and, you know, use it up in some great cooking. You know, it's about zero waste. It's about, you know, not spending money on nonsense consumer products, you know, in shrink wrap trays. It's so... How come there are so many cultures all around the world that really celebrate and make joy out of being sensible? And we've so lost it in white middle England.
Oh, honestly, you're so right. And I think it's the thing is that I keep looking back to all these things. I'm like, why is it the grannies, the yayas, the nonnas, all these, like, you know, the older generations, that they all just got it right? And it's the women. Let's be honest with ourselves. Yeah. It is the women. They know what they're doing. They knew what they're doing. Like, I'm still lucky it's got one of my yayas with me, you know, and I just think and unfortunately, I think obviously there's it comes to things like money. You know, now everyone has a lot more money. We're richer, but we're time poor. And it's that really boring thing, which is why all the kind of popular cookbooks that are out in the world are always like speedy or less washing up. You know, they all tick those boxes because unfortunately that's kind of where the majority of us are, right? We have more money, but we don't have time. Whereas when you look to the older generations, the ones that we like, you know, like the pasta grannies, that sort of vibe, they have time. You know, my yaya there's never a day where she's not cooking for the entire family, and she's 83, you know, and she's smashing it still. She still cooks absolute feasts, and that's because she has the time. She'll sit there and pod her peas, she'll do what she does. It'll take her 2 days, but she loves it. And unfortunately that's just not necessarily realistic, but I think we still need to tap into that mentality to really appreciate stuff, to really understand where our food comes from and connect with our food as opposed to just being this quick fix thing, you know. I really believe that. Yeah, no,
so do I. And, you know, you live in North London. It's the little Mediterranean, really. Yeah. It's like growing up in Cyprus and London, all surrounded by yayas and, you know, the perfect place.
Totally.
I was talking to Yasmin Khan about living in North London in little Istanbul, and she's just surrounded by the lovely smells of, you know, her mixed culture or background as well. In your North London, are those granny skills still around? You talk about Irene in your second food moment. You know, what she got that Joan down the road in West London hasn't got? You know, what is going on?
Oh, I think... Do you know what it is? I think you've nailed it there. I think it's having, and I don't think this is a London-centric viewpoint. I think you have this all around the country. I'm married to a northerner, you know, and whilst the village he's from is predominantly English, you know, I know, having spent time up there now, I know there's pockets everywhere you go from different ethnicities. And I think the reason people congregate is for this reason, right? So I actually do live in, quite ironically, a Cypriot area. I didn't grow up here. So I grew up more central in London, and I've just ended up living in an area that is quite Cypriot, and I actually really like it. And that's not the reason we came here. We came here for different reasons, but there's a loveliness to the fact that I can go to my local shop, which is Irina's Deli, which is literally the closest shop to my house, and the items, the food items, the smells are familiar. And I can imagine if you're someone, you know, I'm a second generation Greek Cypriot, but I can imagine if you're first generation or you've moved from a different country, being connected, you know, like we're looking, you know, we've obviously got, you know, Ukrainians hopefully coming to the UK now and trying to make sure they sort of congregate so they're with people they know, or familiarity. And I think that's a really important thing. So when people first came here, for whatever reason they came, they want to stick with people and vibes and smells and sounds they know. So around me, for sure, like, I don't live that far from Yasmin. I'm the other side of Green Lanes, and we nickname this side of Green Lanes Greek Lanes because it is so Greek and it's brilliant. And it's amazing. And there is something lovely about that. And so with Irini, the deli is fantastic. You know, they've all been born and raised up in the UK like me, but you go in there and again, there's no, and this, I don't mean this in a sexist way at all, but it's all women that work there. So Irini's mum owns it with Irini's sister. she cooks, their cousin works there, and they've got an older lady who works there. And it's just this lovely vibe. It feels like you're going into someone's home. It feels very maternal. You know, at any given point, we went in yesterday, someone was podding some broad beans or peas or something, you know, like there's always, it just feels very homely. And I think that's the thing, especially when you live in a city, I think that's rare because there's lots of glitz and glamour. You go in central London, what's the new hottest dish? What's everyone Instagramming? Let's go there. The thing is, you go there, that's great, but then you've moved on to the next thing. They're not the places that you return back to because you've had that wicked dish. Let's try the next wicked dish that's fashionable at the moment. Yeah. But it's places like Irini's Deli and like that make you feel a sense of home, and that's priceless.
Yeah, but if you say that she sits in a small courtyard rolling vine leaves, you are going to get the whole of London going to Irini's, and then she's going to be in the next book of, you know, cool places to find in London.
And so they should.
Well, exactly. But it'll be spoilt in a way, wouldn't it? You know, isn't that what happens?
Well, yeah, it does. But then, you know, we don't live on a tube line, and I can't imagine it ever becoming like, I mean, it might, and they deserve it if they do, but they're just, what they make is just the best versions of themselves. I think that's the other thing, you know, there's lots of people doing clever things with recipes, and there's a complete place for that as well. You know, I think there's a place for all types of chefing, all types of cooking, but there's something just so lovely about cooks and people that unashamedly just keeps tradition and don't, you know, there's room for everyone, I think.
Yeah, feeders. I think they're feeders. That's where the joy comes from. And they are, aren't they? You know, you can spot a feeder a mile off. They're the people who are not frightened of getting it wrong, and they're the people who just do it for the love of it. And
totally.
You know, they don't get a bad back and from rolling vine leaves. They just do it because they want to feed you. Tell us about the vegan keftedes that she makes.
Oh, my goodness. So keftedes are, you know, all over Greece and Cyprus. So in Greece, different places have different things. So if you go to Santorini, they have tomato keftedes. If you go to different islands, they have chickpea ones. Some have wild greens. In Cyprus, our keftedes are meat-based, and so they make them with pork. And they're really, really delicious. They're deep-fried meatballs, essentially, with grated potato, lots of meat, spices, lots of herbs, onion, and they're sort of made into little patties, and they're deep-fried, and they're dark brown. And I have, over the years, because obviously we fast a lot, I've over the years tried so many different people's attempts at a vegan kefteda. Even my own yayas, both of them, right? I've tried it. And then I tried Irini's, and honestly, they are incredible. I've never ever had, not only are they incredible, I would guarantee you that most people wouldn't clock straight away that they're vegan. They taste so meaty. So the thing for me is, I was vegetarian for a very long time. I even dabbled with veganism when I was younger. It wasn't for me. However, I never wanted to replicate the taste of meat. That's not something that appeals to me. When I didn't eat meat, I didn't want to eat meat. So, and now when I fast as well, I'm not looking to replicate a meatiness. And I know that's my next dish as well. But there's something about these keftedes. They're just, and it's just vegetables. It's just, you know, standard supermarket things. Tomatoes, potatoes, carrots. It's nothing fancy. She doesn't put anything weird in it that is not from the veg aisle. And yet she's created this recipe that is just phenomenal. And people, no joke, not even just Cypriots, everyone in the area knows about these keftedes. People come far and wide for them. And when she said she'd agreed to put them in the book, I was just like, I literally had tears in my eyes. I was like, are you sure about this? This is game changing. So I was really honoured. They're amazing.
Oh, and your third food moment, it kind of is on the same theme, isn't it? You know, if you talk about a Greek classic stifado, you know, slow cooked beef in red wine and spices. Oh my God! Again, salivating madly here. But you've done it with mushroom to replace meat. But where does this idea come from?
So we had a restaurant for almost 30 years. My paternal grandparents had a restaurant for almost 30 years. My dad worked there growing up. It was all my childhood was based around the restaurant. And when I was about 8 or 9, someone, a regular customer, said to my dad, I bet you can't go for a month without eating meat. Now, my dad is a stereotypical Cypriot man. He looks like Al Pacino. He's slightly terrifying. He ate meat 3 meals a day, chain smokes, only drinks coffee, is an absolute legend, right? He's wicked. And you can imagine this very, very sort of typical Greek man, someone saying to him, bet you can't give up meat for a month. And my dad was like, all right, I'll prove it to you. So this is the late 80s now. Dad gives up meat for a month. 32 years later, he still hasn't touched meat.
Wow.
So that was absolutely, everyone was like gobsmacked. He eats fish, in fairness, but he just hasn't touched meat since. He felt so great. And I'm not vegetarian. So I just want to point this out. I'm not preaching anything on anyone because I am not vegetarian. I'm just telling you the story of my dad. But he just felt so great. He was like, I'm just not going to eat meat. And unlike maybe people that do vegetarianism for other reasons, he's always said, listen, George, if I want a steak, I'll have a steak. He's never had a steak, but he has that mentality. He's not doing this for anyone other than himself. It's just his life now. So anyway, so my yaya obviously was horrified because, oh my goodness, Cypriots at that point as well just did not understand vegetarianism. So she was horrified. So we've spent the best part of 30 years, making dishes vegetarian for my dad and now my sister who don't eat meat. And manidaria stefado, so using mushrooms in stefado, came from her. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people that do it. I don't think she's probably the first person because obviously texturally mushrooms have got that meatiness, haven't they? But it was always something she did for my dad. So when he stopped eating meat all those years ago, she did it with mushrooms. And I've just grown up eating stefado predominantly. I can't actually remember the last time I had it with beef, other than when I cook it now as an adult. Growing up, I don't think I ever had it with beef because it was mushrooms. And it's just so delicious. And again, I think they're the 2 recipes in the book that, like I said, I never went about with the intention of making anything meaty. I just want to celebrate all these incredible dishes in their own right. But if you're looking for something that is like a Sunday situation, you want to make something impressive that is slow cook, very little effort, leave it in the oven, but with maximum impact, that's kind of the recipe I would suggest. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's going to appeal to everyone. Yeah. You'll put it on the table and your carnival friends won't care or miss meat. That's what I think.
Yeah. You know what? I mean, it's nothing new. I hear it all the time whenever I talk to people who come from the richer food cultures from around the world. But you're talking about family, you're talking about ritual, you're talking about festivals. And over the last few decades, it feels that British food culture has become very empty of family, of tradition, of ritual, of religion. And I wonder, when you're talking about this rich story of people at the table every Sunday and growing up around big family and, the year being punctuated by festivals and saints' days and ritual, I wonder if British food culture, which is so eclectic and so inspired by such a varied mix and wonderful sort of immigrant cultures coming in and spicing us up, without religion, without family at the centre of it, can it really be a food culture of its own?
Gosh, that's a really, really interesting question. I mean, that's a really hard one to answer. And I think, again, being sort of, for me, like living in a city which is super multicultural, I guess I've never really had that. I have never really had that. And actually, do you know what occurred to me the other day? I'm probably going on a tangent here. It's just, this is my brain thinks. I've obviously grown up with a very, very rich heritage in food, having grown up in a restaurant and being obviously from where I'm from, like Cyprus and whatnot. But even my husband, who is the first to say that his mother is maybe not the best cook in the world. Sorry, Heather. But, he's the first one to say his mum wasn't the best cook. They had the same weekly menu their whole life. Every Monday was bangers and mash. However, isn't there something lovely about that? And I used to tease Heather, my mother-in-law, about the fact that, she had the same thing every Monday, every Tuesday. Didn't you get bored? But now I look at that with so much respect in a way, because of what you're saying, because of this sort of, there's so much going on. Actually, I look at my own daughters and I'm like, do I need to start making things regularly so you have nostalgia, so you have heritage with your food? I mean, they're going to get it inevitably because I'm Cypriot and I cook a lot of Cypriot food. So I'm they're not going to exactly be, they're fine at the end of the day. But because I cook so much food for my job, because every day I'm cooking different dishes constantly, I became really aware recently that these girls aren't regularly getting the same dish twice. And whilst that's probably not a bad thing, people are like, oh, first world problems, not really an issue. Isn't there something lovely about nostalgia and heritage with food, whether it comes from religion, whether it comes from your family, whatever the reason is? I think there's something really beautiful about that. And I think that connection with food is what grounds us. Otherwise, you're just always chasing new things. And and I think for a lot of people where food's important, well, actually not even where food's important. I think everyone has an association or memory with food. And I don't think you even have to necessarily be what we consider a foodie or a chef or whatever. Like, everyone does, right? And I think that's something that we need to really focus on. And that's, you know this about me. That's something that all my writing, all my books is, for me, is super personal in that nostalgic way. And I just think that's lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's the world that you paint around the food that is so important. And your fourth food moment is about play and fun. And, you're talking about nostalgia. You're talking about a childhood memory here, but there are kids who are growing up within your culture who are still experiencing this now. This is the meat. We're talking about things, but this is the meat of food culture, I think, across the globe. Tell us about this one.
Oh, it's so true. So, oh my goodness. Okay, I mean, now I can appreciate this, but I'm telling you something. As a child, being dragged to church fetes in 45-degree heat in Cyprus in August was not my idea of a good time, right? So we got sent to Cyprus almost every summer holidays, 6 weeks long. What do you do with children? I'm starting to appreciate why my parents did this. They would often send us to Cyprus with our grandparents. Off you go, bye-bye. And because they weren't always there, it meant we were left at the hands of my grandmother. My paternal one particularly, not so much my maternal one, she didn't really drive, but that meant lots of church visits. So whilst me and my sister were there just wanting to hit the beach, Yaya had other ideas, and that meant every weekend there was a church fete. So on the island, almost every weekend, it's someone's saint's day, right? There's a saint day almost every day of the year. So that meant every weekend we're going to go to one part of the island, there's a church so-and-so somewhere, and they're having a fete to celebrate Saint so-and-so. And I'm like, this is brilliant, thanks so much. And these church fetes, they were super basic. I remember there not being toilets, there being holes in the ground. We're talking, the 80s, not much money, but there was so much charm and they were so beautiful. And I look back and I think, gosh, how lucky to have gone through that. There was like a very basic tombola, a little like, is it like bagatelle? Is that the word? Like where you have like the ball, the game, I think that's what they call it over here, and you win these big teddy bears and these retro style toys. And then there would be a few stalls of souvla, so meat cooked over charcoal, and then there was the sweet stall, and they would have all the different sweets, and there was always someone deep frying lokomades, which are essentially like tiny little round donuts that are then drenched in a sugar syrup, and something called shamishi. So shamishi is not like lokomades. Lots of people seem to know nowadays. They've sort of become quite popular. You get lokomade stalls over here. You get them in bakeries. It's not just Cypriots and Greeks that know about them. Whereas shamishi is something that still feels quite unknown about because of they're quite laborious, and you have to eat them almost instantly. You can't buy them in bakeries and whatnot. And what they are deep fried parcels of custard, essentially. So you make a custard with semolina, orange blossom, really delicately floral, and that custard is set, and then it's cut into little cubes, and it's enrobed in phyllo pastry, which is then deep fried and drenched in a cinnamon icing sugar. It is so ludicrously delicious, in the way that only a deep fried pastry filled with custard can be, which sounds ridiculous that I can even tell you that is vegan, but it's vegan, right? Because the custard's made of water, but it gets its creaminess from the semolina. It gets its perfume from a little orange blossom. If you don't like that, you can add orange zest. That's cool. I won't judge. And, I say making phyllo, but actually making phyllo is actually very easy. And then you deep fry them. And the response when people eat these parcels of joy, it's insane. It makes people so happy. There's so much nostalgia there. And I love the fact that this recipe kind of still is unknown about. I don't really know anyone other than Cypriots that have heard of it. And it's something that has to be eaten instantly. So there's just this lovely instant joy. And it's one of my strongest memories of my childhood. And it was probably the only thing that kept me going to the Banairids, these fetes, because, you know, they were really quite boring for a 7-year-old, other than the shamishi. That was where I headed. Every time, straight there.
Little parcels of joy. How gorgeous. Nistisima means fasting food, and you have tapped into this rich vein of your own heritage. But actually, you know, we talked about the depth before, but you did speak to a lot of priests as part of your research. It's about more than food, isn't it? It's about the spiritual in the food. You know, nostalgia is a kind of spirituality, isn't it? It's also about resilience as well, and self-sufficiency. And you talk about the priests who you interviewed, you know, being very self-sufficient, growing their own food, as a lot of monks and priests have always done. Yeah. Did it really connect you with your spiritual self?
Do you know what? It really did. I'm the first person, you know, I'm not as religious as some people. I'm probably more religious than others. I'm very sort of, I'd say, middle. But I found whatever it is, however you come to the book, whether it's because you are Orthodox and you want to have more of a repertoire for when you fast, or you are someone who is vegan and you just want more vegan recipes, or you are just a normal Joe carnivore who just wants to up your vegan intake, I genuinely think that regardless of your faith, there is a spirituality that comes from sort of connecting in this way. And the book feels so calm. And there's such a, and that's not me blowing my own trumpet here, because it's 100% a team effort. You know, there's photographers, stylists, all of those people involved that have really created this thing of beauty that I think it reflects the calmness that comes through the cooking. None of the recipes, I would say, are particularly challenging or taxing. And that's the way I think really Nistisima food should be. You know, when I was talking to the monks, I spoke to, I've got a lovely monk in Lebanon on WhatsApp called Father Augustine. He's wonderful. He's been very helpful. You know, I've been talking to the monks in Mount Athos on email. That's been quite sporadic, but again, they've been fantastic. And then my local priest at a local church. You know, so I've been speaking to different people. And I think the key thing that I've learned by speaking, and also nuns, I visited some wonderful nuns in Cyprus. And I think the thing is, the simplicity of their food is where the beauty is. And I think that's, and we talk, you know, everyone has quite stressful lives nowadays. I talk about everyone being time poor. We are time poor. There's a lot of anxiety, and that's something to really, I think, take into account. So I think regardless of your faith, a book like this, connecting to the food, connecting to the recipes, it's just calming. And I think that's a really important thing to focus on, because regardless of what you believe, for me, when I was cooking a lot of the dishes, they just sort of made me feel the way a risotto, slowly cooking a risotto sort of calms you. There's a similar vibe. One of my favourite recipes in the book is a Serbian dish, and it's these very simple beans, hardly any ingredients. You're talking a hefty amount of onions, 8 onions, garlic, and they're just slowly cooked in oil for a good 30, 40 minutes, and that sweetness. And it was a monk in Mount Athos who said, you know, the key thing with when you're not having animal products in foods is the time and the sweetness that comes from your ingredients. You think, how can something so simple be so delicious? You then add the beans, you add some paprika, a bay leaf, and you leave it in the oven for literally 2 hours. And I made them recently for a group of fellow food writers, and they were all just gobsmacked at these beans and how delicious they were. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? We just need to connect, and that feeling inside, yeah, it made me feel more spiritual. And that sounds very cheesy, and I really don't want it to be, but at a time when we were going through a pandemic, you know, I'd had a newborn baby, things were stressful. I really felt the book was, for me at least, very timely, and it did what it said on the tin in a lot of ways.
Fasting to slow down should have been the subtitle. Why didn't you do that one?
I mean, because you weren't there to tell me. I should call you next time. I'll give you a call, yeah? Book 4. Speed dial.
Thanks for listening. Please do get in touch on social media. I'm at Cooking the Books with Julie Smith on Instagram and at Julie Smith on Twitter. And you can sign up for my newsletter at juliesmith.com. I'll be back next week with the authors of Feed Your Family, Nicole Pisani and Joanna Weinberg, to talk about the brilliant charity Chefs in Schools.